we could calculate some quantities which are like global, globally average quantities like ionized fractions, optical depths, and so on. And I hope you may have gotten some flavor of how this model works in the tutorial. So today we take it forward and really come to something which is the core of reionization process, which is its patchiness. Reionization, if driven by galaxies, if driven by stars within galaxies, has to be patchy. So regions which are near the galaxies will be ionized first. Regions which are away from the galaxies will be ionized later. Now, this distribution of galaxies in our universe is not random. The galaxies themselves are clustered. If you are sitting on a galaxy, you have more probability of seeing a galaxy near you. Okay? And similarly, if you are sitting in a void, you have less probability of seeing galaxies around you. This also affects the structure of this reionization topology. Also, we know that like massive halos are rare, and hence they are more clustered. This also comes from the large-scale structure, hierarchical structure formation and excursion set models. Again, the same thing will happen. I mean, will show up in the morphology of reionization as well. So if you try to do reionization via bright galaxies sitting in massive halos, then you will see a small number of very large ionized regions. If you try to do it by a large number of faint galaxies, then you will see a lot of small ionized regions and so on. So you can visually see this in these two panels, which I think I discussed yesterday also. We already have the idea about the main ingredients we need to model reionization. Starting from dark matter halos to galaxy and star formation to radiative transfer. And I'm not going to go through this slide again, but this is something which we have discussed in great detail yesterday. Now, of course, as we saw yesterday, that we can do everything analytically and we will get the nice globally average quantities. But if we want to do patchiness, you have to do some kind of numerical simulations. Okay, how complicated they will be now will now depend on what you exactly want to do. So let's talk about now the ingredients you need to simulate reionization. So the first ingredient, of course, has to be the dark matter simulation. You need that dark matter simulation. So what you can do is you can run n-body simulations and you can run simple dark matter only or gravity only simulation. Or if you want, you can put gas also if you want to track the gas as well. So these are done by what are known as SPH, smooth particle hydrodynamics, or full hydrodynamic simulation. So this will give you basically the density field, the intergalactic medium and density field, and also the location of the halos. And what happens is there are actually many codes available to do that. I think you may have worked with one of the codes in previous week during the tutorials. I was not sure, but I think you have done that. But there are other examples as well. I mean, there are codes like Gadget, there are codes like Enzo, Arepo, QP3M, and so on. I mean, you can just go and try to look for them and then pick the one which like you find it most convenient or which really suits the problem you are working on. Now, in more recent times, what has happened is now, I mean, depending on again the problem you are working, you may not even have to run the simulation. There are data archives. People have run huge dynamic range simulations, lots and lots of particles, big boxes, different types of boxes, and so on. And they have made the data public. So if you have enough bandwidth and can download the data, you can just take the data and work with that. Okay, and a very most famous example is probably Illustris in recent times. The data you can actually go and try to download. And then there are other such data archives as well. The one I know of is called Cosmosym, and there are others. So again, you can look for them. Of course, as I said, you not only get the density field from these simulations, you also have to find the halos, the location and mass of the halos. So for that, you employ some halo finder, okay, some halo finder algorithm. And the most common examples of halo finders are FOF, friends of friends algorithm, but there are others also, like spherical over density. And then Rockstar. Rockstar is an algorithm which is, you are still doing FOF, but you are doing it in the 6-dimensional phase space. So you also account for the velocities of the particles. So in that sense, it's quite sophisticated. Rockstar is also a public code. So many people nowadays just download Rockstar and apply that onto their dark matter simulations and find halos. Of course, after you find halos, what you have to do, there is one thing which I didn't mention here, and it could be important, is sometimes your simulations could be not so high resolution so that you can identify the halos very accurately. In those cases, even if you run a simulation, you may want to employ some kind of analytical or semi-analytical technique based on whatever you have learned in the large scale structure lectures, like something like excursion set, Preschecter set torment, but slightly advanced version of those. And you can like put halos by hand, which will be okay with all the halo properties we are aware of. So that is another way of doing it. Anyway, but assuming you have found halos, the next remember the next step in our ingredient list is to do the star formation and galaxy formation and escape of photons. Unfortunately, at least in the reionization community, in this level, what you do is basically you use whatever you were doing in the analytical models. You just find a way to relate the photon production rate to the mass of the halo, okay, and you put in some efficiency parameter. Now you can make these models more sophisticated by making the efficiency parameter mass dependent, time dependent, and so on, but it's very unlikely that you will go and try to do really star formation and galaxy formation within the halo. Those kind of simulations are extremely rare. In the reionization community, a lot of time actually is spent in developing radiative transfer simulations. So assuming that you have worked out all these galaxy formation, or you know how much where the halos are and how many ionizing photons they are producing, how do you propagate the ionization fronts through the intergalactic medium? Now you can try to use these radiative transfer simulations along with the cosmological n-body simulation, but those are extremely expensive and hence rare. Usually what is done is you post-process on the generated density field. So you assume that your radiative transfer is not going to affect the density field. So whatever density field you have generated remains as it is. And on top of that, you do the radiative transfer. And this seems to work reasonably well. So let me spend some time on this radiative transfer part. The radiative transfer equation is something which is very well studied in astrophysics. It actually forms, almost the basics of astrophysics. You cannot do astrophysics without learning radiative transfer equation. So what it gives you is a equation, a partial differential equation for what is known as the specific intensity. And this is the conventional form of the radiative transfer. So there is a time derivative part and there is a spatial directional derivative part of the specific intensity I nu. And on the right hand side, you have everything which can change your specific intensity. In particular, the first term is the absorption term, where kappa nu is the absorption coefficient, and you can see the absorption term itself is proportional to the specific intensity. So you need to have some intensity for it to get absorbed, of course. And then there is the emission term, okay, which does not depend on the specific intensity. You can emit even if the specific intensity is 0. Okay, and I have just defined them. Of course, this is a conventional form which is valid for a static Euclidean space. In presence of cosmological expansion, you need to introduce some additional terms, and you will realize that this equation has gotten modified. Now there is a 1 by A which has appeared here. There are some terms which depends on A dot by A. So these are basically coming because of the expansion. Okay, so this 1 by A accounts for the fact that we work in co-moving coordinates in cosmology. This is the term which accounts for the fact that there is redshift of photons. So as the universe expands, your specific intensity from one frequency band will shift to another frequency band. And this is just the volume dilution term, the final term. Okay, so these are the physical interpretations of the terms which we have introduced. Now, for cosmological case, the emission term can be simplified because many times we assume that either the emission is isotropic or maybe the distribution of the emitters is randomly oriented. So you will always worry about large volumes, and within that you have many emitters, each of them emitting in a randomly oriented direction. So overall thing is reasonably isotropic. So instead of working with J nu, we work with something which is called emissivity, which is effectively you just integrate over all the solid angles, and if J nu itself is isotropic, then it will just give you a 4 pi. So the equation just changes accordingly. Okay, so you will see that this J nu has been replaced by an epsilon nu, and there is a 4 pi term. Now, suppose you know what are the physical processes which are giving rise to absorption, and you also know the emissivity. Emissivity means what? Somebody has given you all the halo positions and how much photons they are producing. So you know, you have found a way to model it. Okay. So even assuming that these two are known, what you have to do is, if you want to solve this equation, you will realize that this is a partial differential equation with 7 independent variables. Okay. And these kind of equations are like, I mean, if you try to solve it numerically for all grid points, for all directions, for all possible frequencies, I mean, you simply cannot do with whatever computing power you have today. Okay. So you either have to you have to try to make kind of approximations. You really can't solve this equation in its full glory. So you do something which will either lead to things which are inaccurate, or if you try to reach an accuracy, then it will be very computing intensive, okay, inefficient in other words. Now, people do simulations, try to solve this. And there are many ways to solve this. I mean, because you cannot just go and solve this directly, you will find ways to simplify that and solve it. And the methods can be broadly divided into 2 parts. I mean, I'm not saying those divisions are like extremely rigid, but broadly there are 2 approaches. One is called moment-based methods, and another is called ray tracing. So I will just give you a flavor of what people try to do. The first one is where you take the radiative transfer equation and then take moments of it. Moments means you just integrate over all solid angles. So if you want to do the first moment, what you do is you take this equation or this equation is the correct one to work with. You just integrate over d omega and divide by 4 pi. So that is like angular averaging. You will end up with the equation which will look like this. And there are new terms which have come in. One term is J nu. This is capital J nu, which is nothing but like angular average of the specific intensity. It's often called the mean intensity. And then there is another term which will come, which is I nu multiplied by the unit vector in that direction. So you can see this is a vector actually. So this is nothing but the radiation flux. I mean, so you multiply by the unit vector along that direction, and then you integrate over all solid angles. So this will give you the flux of radiation. And then there are other terms. The other terms just pick up that simple J. So this equation is slightly simplified, but and then you can try to solve it for all grid points. Since you have averaged over all solid angles, what happens is like 2 variables go out of the picture. So that's how you get it simplified a bit. But then suppose you treat it as a differential equation for J nu, capital J nu, that is the mean intensity. So kappa nu and epsilon nu are known. You will solve for J nu, but for that you need to know the flux. Okay, so you can, so this system, this equation is not closed. You need another equation. So you say that, okay, for flux, I need to write another equation. So how do I do that? I see that flux is nothing but intensity multiplied by Ni, and then I do a solid angle integral. So why don't I just go back to the original equation and multiply by Ni and then do a d omega by 4 pi. Then it will give me a equation for the flux itself. Okay. That is basically the second moment. Okay. So you multiply now by Ni and then integrate over d omega and divide by 4 pi. Now you will get an equation for flux. This is what you wanted, right? So this is the time derivative of flux, and you can see the flux appears everywhere. Interestingly, the emission terms now goes out of the picture. But now what has happened is, in the second term, you have introduced a new quantity, okay, which is called the Eddington tensor in this case. This is nothing but I nu. Now you multiply by Ni and J, okay, two components of the unit vector in two different directions. So this is basically a tensor now, okay, it will be a 3 by 3 tensor, a symmetric tensor. Now you are in trouble, because now if you want to solve, so even if you take these two equations, they are not closed. So now you need an equation for Eddington tensor, and now you understand the problem. If you now try to derive an equation for Eddington tensor, that will contain terms which are of higher order in this higher moments basically. So this leads to actually an infinite hierarchy of equation, and this is a well-known problem in fluid dynamics. Yeah, there's a question. Go ahead. So whoever it is, please unmute and go ahead. Unless they are not able to unmute.
No, I don't see any hand raised.
Okay, I got a message.
Okay. No, I can. Yeah, I can unmute.
Yeah, hi. So I was asking. So this NING, so we take some tensor product there or something.
Which one?
I mean, to get this Eddington tensor, this Ni and N.
No. It is simple product. Okay. So imagine you want to calculate H nu x y. So it will be d omega x hat y hat I nu. X hat y hat is just whatever I hat j hat, whatever you call the unit vectors along x and y direction.
Okay, so it's like,
think of that everything is in Cartesian coordinates.
Yes, we will get a matrix finally.
Yes, you will get a 3 by 3 matrix, symmetric matrix. Okay, but that will, under rotation, that will transform like a tensor.
Okay, sure. Thank you.
So in that sense, it's simple. And since we are interested in scales which are much smaller than the size of the Hubble radius, at this level, the universe can be taken to be flat. We are not bothered about curvature and relativistic effects in this case. Expansion you have to account for, but you don't have to really worry about the curvature related effects. So things are, so Cartesian coordinates and things like that work fine. Now, if you want to solve the system, you really cannot work with infinite hierarchy unless some moments really start to go to zero, but that you don't know a priori. So now you have to close the system, you have to assume something. Now, this is called a closure relation. And different people assume different closure relations, and that leads to different codes, basically, in the moment-based methods, okay, and different papers. So you will basically find a way to relate this Eddington tensor to something, okay, either the source properties or whatever. So I won't go into the details of this closure relation, but the moment you make this assumption, now you have to worry about what they did to your equations. One thing you will realize is the information about the anisotropy of the field, of the radiation field, is actually there in this Eddington tensor, particularly the off-diagonal terms of the Eddington tensor. So the moment you make some assumption, you have to be very careful whether you are like getting rid of these anisotropies in the picture. Okay, so one way of understanding this is, imagine I nu to be isotropic, no omega dependence. then you will realize that this H nu ij will be a diagonal tensor. Okay. So clearly the off diagonal terms are representing some kind of an anisotropy. Anyway, now these moment methods, the plus point of them are they're very efficient. Okay, you can just set up some position grid and can solve for them. And for many cases, you can actually ignore the cosmological terms as well. So if the photons travel a short distance before they get absorbed, which is often true at high redshift, these two terms can be ignored. So it's a very simple equation to solve if you cut at this level. So you're just solving two coupled differential equations. And it can be very efficient. But because you will assume some closure relation, they tend to be diffusive. Okay, so you lose information about the anisotropies in the intensity in the radiation field. So if, for example, if there are shadowing effects and things like that, those may not be captured very well in these moment-based methods where you are integrating over all solid angles. A complementary method is when you try to do the solution not using moments, but you solve as a solution along a line of sight. Okay, so you integrate along a line of sight. So this is basically as if you are treating the radiation field as collection of rays. Different lines of sights which correspond to rays. The formal way of doing it is you take differential equations and you can solve them using what is known as method of characteristics. This is a well-defined method of solving linear differential equations. Okay. So, and in this case, you will get a very like this is the proper solution using method of characteristics. So I nu along a sight line will be whatever I nu you started with, okay, from wherever you started the ray. But that will be you have to there will be absorption along the line of sight. So there will be e to the minus tau. When we were doing Lyman alpha forest in the last class or the first class, this is the term I was using. But what can happen is along the line of sight there could be emission also. So then that is the second term. So this is the term which is telling you that along the line of sight, if there is emission, so you put those emissivities into that. But then in the middle of the line of sight, it will start emitting, but those light which is emitted will also get absorbed between where it is emitted and where you are calculating this I nu. So you have to do e to the minus tau to this also and then integrate properly. So again, this kind of solutions are also there when there are no effects of expansion and all. So this is a very, again, standard solution of the radiative transfer equation. If you put in the terms relevant to the expansion, you will get things like volume dilution and redshift effects, like the frequency which you observe will not be the frequency with which it is emitted and so on. So again, if you are interested, again, as a homework, you should try to work these out. Again, just you do it once using proper method of characteristics, and then you will realize that this is indeed the solution, and then try to understand it physically. So from every source in your box, in your simulation volume, you generate rays, and then you compute the resulting intensity using this solution. Okay, you track the rays basically. Now the problem is, first of all, from a given source, you can ask how many rays do I have to choose, and that will basically decide your angular resolution of the problem. Because if you just take a source and like throw only 4 rays, then you will be missing out a lot. Okay, you should be probably throwing out enough rays so as to capture the angular structure of that whatever is emitting that light. And this can make the algorithm extremely expensive. Okay, so now you don't have the problem of anisotropy being washed out, but these kind of algorithms are extremely expensive. Okay? There are many radiative transfer simulations, and I'm not going to spend much time on them because of obvious reasons, as we will see soon. Basically, what happens is they are basically stuck with the dynamic range problem. Okay, at one end, you need to really probe scales of hundreds of megaparsecs to gigaparsec sizes because you want to be comparable with the survey volume and you want to make sure all the rare sources are also accounted for. On the other hand, you may also want to probe extremely small scales. Okay, the smallest baryonic structures would correspond to the gene scale, which can be quite small. You need to also resolve the smallest halos which are hosting stars, maybe 10 to the 8, maybe smaller. Okay, even in the time level, you have to really work with a variety of time scales. Okay, so it becomes a very difficult problem. So hence there is scope for doing which are not full radiative transfer simulation, but relatively simplified fast models. So since simulations are computationally expensive, there are dynamic range issues. You cannot really run them many times. Okay, so suppose you have 5 models of galaxy formation. You have to run like 5 radiative transfer simulations to see the results, and each of them may take months to run. In fact, 5 is a very small number because we don't know so many things about galaxy formation at high redshift, as I was trying to tell in the previous lecture. You may want to run many simulations, right? So then that is called probing the parameter space in some sense. So that is where the radiative transfer simulations can become very expensive. So you can do it using some simplified fast models. Of course, there is a price you pay because you are not doing the full physics. You will make assumptions and approximations, and sometimes you will also run and then calibrate with full simulation and see whether things are working and maybe tweak something and so on. Okay. Now I want to spend more time here because this is something which I think our group, which are organizing this conference, that is the UR group, 21 centimeter group within India. This is one of our strong points. In fact, while making the lectures and having discussions, I realized we have already three such codes which are developed and maintained by members of this 21 centimeter group in India. I put this thing in quotations because I don't mean to say that there were no people from outside India involved. There were, and some of these people who have developed are probably now outside India, but they are very strongly kind of involved with the Indian group, and they are, for example, part of the organizing committee. So I think this is something which we can focus on for some time. And the three codes which come to my mind, and again, pardon me if I have forgotten some, is one by Grizzly, and I'm giving the name of the person who you can contact, but it's not necessarily the only person who is maintaining the code. But so for Grizzly, the person to contact is Raghunath Ghara. There is another code which is Riayan Yuga, and I don't know whether you had tutorials on that in the previous week. So the person to contact is Rajesh Mondal, but there would be others also who are working on this, and there is a nice GitHub repository. And the third script, for that you have to talk to me. That's called Script, and I think we will have a tutorial on Script later today. Okay, and let me just quickly, whatever time is remaining today, describe these three codes. Okay, and that's where I wanted to spend most of the time. First one, as I said, is Grizzly. Here, what is done is it is still a radiative transfer code, but it doesn't do the radiative transfer fully in 3 dimensions. It does in 1 dimension. Okay, so it was based on an earlier code by Rajat Thomas and Salim Zaroubi and all. So you either doing it in 1 direction means you are implicitly assuming spherical symmetry. Okay. So it reduces the dimensionality of the problem drastically, and hence it's very efficient. So this is something which Raghu was developing during his PhD with myself and Kanan when he was in NCRA. But later on, he has really made it extremely sophisticated now, and it is very useful for even interpreting reionization data nowadays. So what you do is you find whatever properties you need to know, the ionization and thermal structure around each source, assuming spherical symmetry. And then what you do is you take these spherical whatever regions around each source and find a way to merge them suitably to compute the full map. Now, what I have shown here is the ionization map obtained from a full n-body simulation, a full radiative transfer simulation called C2Ray versus Grizzly. So the source model, I mean, the initial conditions and the source model for the 2 cases are the same. what was different was this radiative transfer algorithm. And you can see at broadly, if you think about the large scale structure, the Grizzly actually tracks the C2 ray quite well. But then you can see differences also. I mean, I don't know, just focus on maybe this one or one of these regions. You will see that Grizzly tends to kind of wash out some of the small scale inhomogeneity. It is like more smooth, more spherical looking structure, like this one versus this one. So there are differences, but if you are only interested in kind of large scales, then Grizzly can track the C2 ray quite nicely, which is something good. Okay, yeah, Prakash raised hand. Can I?
So, Tirth, is Grizzly similar? I mean, the results of Grizzly similar to that of movement-based method with symmetry?
Good question. So Grizzly has been tested, I mean, in that level only with C2 ray.
Okay.
Okay, now you can ask, is C2 ray, how does it compare with moment-based methods? So I don't know of any very recent studies, but what they did is they did a very comprehensive code comparison. This would have been done maybe, I don't know, 8 to 10 years back, maybe more. I really don't know the exact year. When all these Iliev, Benedetta Ciardi, Tom Abel, all of them came together and did a very detailed code comparison, and there are papers on them.
Correct.
And there were differences, and they could understand these differences and the same problem. I mean, so they unfortunately they did it under very, I mean, they took very like strict problems, like one source, one shadow, this, that. And compared them, and then they found differences. They understood the differences, and differences were qualitatively exactly what I showed earlier. But whether they compared 21 centimeter maps and the power spectrum, I don't remember. I don't think they did it. At least they did not do it very quantitatively. Okay, so that is still to be done. Okay, so yeah.
The other thing is the Grizzly can also account for the shadowing.
Grizzly accounting for shadowing will be slightly difficult in this case because it still assumes spherical symmetry. So yeah, it will account for shadowing in a very spherical sense.
Correct.
Yeah. So suppose you have a source and you have just one DLA sitting nearby.
Correct.
It may not be able to account for the shadow just behind it. But what it will do is, spherically kind of averaging way, it will reduce photons in all directions because of that one DLA sitting in one direction.
Correct.
Okay, so that is, that's what it will do.
Thanks. Yeah.
Okay. So now let us come to, this is one thing, which is almost radiative transfer, but not quite. But then I wanted to talk about the other two codes, which essentially are much simpler. They actually count photons. Okay, they are like almost like photon counting algorithms. So what is the idea? The idea is, suppose you have a halo of mass m, and let us say it produces some photons. We know how many photons it will produce based on the efficiency parameter, the reionization efficiency parameter zeta, which we introduced in the previous lecture. This essentially is the number of photons it will produce, and we are assuming that we are only considering halos which are above m min, so that we don't have to worry about cooling and other things. Okay, we are only talking about atomically cooled halos. Okay. Now, for simplicity, you assume that there is no recombination. Recombination can be put later, but let's assume that there are no recombination. Then if you go back to the equation which you were working with yesterday, dq dt equal to whatever, you will realize that you can just integrate. If you throw out the recombination term, what will happen is the q will be essentially kind of integration of n dot. So you will end up showing that the number of ionizing photons produced is equal to the number of atoms ionized. Of course, this is obvious. If there is no recombination, that is precisely what is going to happen. Okay. Now, if you imagine there is just one halo and you just are worried about one halo, what it will do is it will produce a ionized bubble, a H2 bubble around it. Okay, it may or may not be spherical. Actual shape is not important. But what we know is its volume. If we just interpret the volume in terms of some radius r and just say that this is the volume that is ionized, then the volume that is ionized times the number density of hydrogen atoms. The number density of hydrogen atom is the average number density times 1 plus the density contrast within that region. So this is the total number of hydrogen atom within that region of size r. That should be equal to the number of photons that is produced. Okay, so this is something which is just coming from photon counting. This relation you will be you realize is equivalent to that the mass content within the region R should be equal to zeta times the mass of the halo. That means a halo of mass m will actually ionize the region which contains dark matter mass equivalent to zeta times m. So this is basically what comes from just conservation of photons. Okay. Here we have assumed that baryons follow dark matter and all, but fine. I mean, those are probably reasonable when we are at the scales which we are dealing with. So now if this was the picture, you take halos and put bubbles around them. And if the bubbles didn't overlap, you would have solved the reionization problem, at least at the first order level. The simple picture unfortunately breaks down because of bubble overlaps. Because if things overlap, then I mean, you don't know what to do in the overlap region. That is where something came up, which is the concept of self-ionized region. So here you say, I don't care about like one halo and one bubble around it. I just ask the question that I'm looking at a region of size R. Is this region capable of self-ionizing? Okay, ionizing itself. What do you mean self-ionizing? Self-ionizing means I will say that region is self-ionized if the number of photons produced by the sources within it exceeds the number of hydrogen atoms present. Okay, again, this is obvious, but now the question is, how do you identify these self-ionized regions? So the condition for self-ionization is essentially this. If there is a region of size R, you find out all the sources within that region R, all the halos within region R. You find out how many photons they are producing. That is the total number of photons produced by sources within that region R. That should be greater than or equal to the number of hydrogen atoms within that region. Okay. So this is very similar to the previous relation, but except now we are counting multiple sources and hence we are able to account for bubble overlaps using this concept. You will realize that you can now do a very simple calculation. You will realize that this essentially simplifies to zeta times the mass of the halo, sum over them, divided by the mass contained within that region R. This quantity should be greater than equal to 1. The algebra, I will again ask you to work it out. Okay, there are some 3-4 steps which are involved here. This quantity, this numerator divided by denominator thing, is essentially the collapse fraction. This is the mass within halos divided by the total mass. That is nothing but the collapse fraction. So the condition then reduces to zeta times the collapse fraction. Now not the global collapse fraction, the global collapse fraction within region R. This quantity needs to be greater than equal to 1. So if you find a region where this condition is satisfied, you know that that region is self-ionized. Okay, it can ionize itself. Now, this is a very good concept, but how do you implement in a simulation box? So simulation box means somebody maybe has run an n-body simulation and given you the position of the halos and you have found a way to, I mean, you have multiplied that by zeta to find the number of photons produced. So imagine these are those sources, okay, in your simulation box. Now what you will do is you will grid the simulation box first, okay? And then at each grid you ask, is this grid ionized or not? Okay. Now, if you can answer this question for every grid, then the problem is solved. So for each grid, you will either assign it ionized or not ionized. And at the end, you will find the box where some cells are ionized, some cells are not ionized, and that is the reionization like picture. So here what you do is you use what is known as excursion set algorithms, okay, which can account for bubble overlaps. So suppose you want to know whether this cell is ionized. Okay, let's say just start with this cell. So the idea would be you first draw a large sphere of radius r, and then you ask the question, is this condition satisfied within that region r? Maybe not. Maybe you have drawn a huge sphere. So then you reduce the size of the sphere. Again, ask the same question. Is it ionized? Is it self-ionized? Maybe yes, maybe no. If yes, then you know that this cell will be ionized. If no, then you keep on reducing the size of the sphere. And if at any point it gets ionized, basically you flag this region as ionized. Okay, this cell as ionized. And then you go to the next cell and ask the same question. This is essentially a barrier crossing problem. This has a lot of similarities with, for example, halo finding, the way you do it using excursion sets. And this concept was first introduced by these people, led by Stephen Furlanetto, and he has worked a lot on these issues. Now, maybe there are some cells for which the barrier is not crossed at all. So for those cells, what you do is you don't really say that it is completely neutral, because there might be some source sitting inside. So in that case, you assign some partial ionization to that cell. Okay, and that partial ionization will be whatever is zeta times the collapse fraction within that cell. So what will happen is at the end, you will have some cells which are completely ionized. You will have some cells which are completely neutral. And then you will have some cells, maybe few of them, which are partially ionized. And then basically you will have a map of ionized regions. And it is actually extremely fast, these things being done. Actually, you don't really go and ask the question for each cell. You work this problem out in Fourier space. And it becomes very simple. I mean, it's just convolutions which become multiplications in Fourier spaces. It's an extremely fast algorithm. In fact, this algorithm was first kind of implemented in a box by Messenger and Furlanetto, and then Messenger, Furlanetto, and Chen. That led to their 21 centimeter fast code. And they compared with kind of full simulations, and then they found that again the large scale structure of the field looks very similar, and these would be the corresponding power spectra. I'm just thinking of Prakash's question. I don't remember what this full simulation is, but I think Renyu-Chen simulation is moment based. Then in that case, this gives you a comparison between the excursion set methods and the moment based methods. Okay, but I need to check what these simulations were. Just
So,
to
in this excursion set, can we also change the shape of the kernel, which is spherical instead of
Yes.
spherical? Can we put
Yes.
it like a elongated, or I mean asymmetric kind of?
Asymmetric is difficult because then, I mean, because we will be using the same kernel all throughout. So
Correct.
people haven't used asymmetric or anisotropic kernels, but they have used, instead of spherical top hat, people have used Gaussian as well as sharp K filters.
Correct.
Okay, sharp K filters seem to show some advantages.
Okay.
Okay, it's not easy to understand physically the sharp K filters because in real space they oscillate,
Correct.
but they seem to give more. I mean, the match with the simulation seem to be better with sharp K
Correct.
filters.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, and when I come to photon conservation, the sharp K filters, the photon conservation is also slightly better.
Correct.
Yeah. In fact, we also did. I mean, we started developing our own excursion set models. Okay, and this, for example, is a work done by Shumon Majumdar. So this is that SEMNUM, which is our excursion set model, and this is C2 ray, which is a like ray-based radiative transfer simulation. And when we tried to look at the matches, I mean, there were differences, but the overall the large scale map seemed to match quite well. So that gives us like confidence that this kind of photon counting methods would work. In fact, that SEMNUM has now been like evolved into this nice code, Riyan Yuga, which Rajesh maintains, and people should download and try to use it. So basically, the overall idea is, in this case, the density field and the halos are obtained using a dark matter n-body simulation. And then you apply excursion set to obtain the ionization field. Okay. So there are a series of papers which help develop these codes. Okay. Basically, it's extremely fast and efficient generation of ionization. However, these excursion set models have a problem of photon conservation. What you can do is you generate these maps. Now you ask the question that I know what is the total number of photons produced in the whole box, which is this, which is equivalent to something like zeta times the mass of halos, all the mass of halos in the box, okay, and some scaling factors, of course. But the total number of photons produced must be the total number of hydrogen ionized, because basically you started with that idea, right? This concept of self-ionized regions and so on. Now the total number of hydrogen atoms in the box is this. So the ionized mass fraction would be the total, the number of photons produced divided by the total number of hydrogen atoms. So this will give you the ionized mass fraction, and you can show that that will turn out to be zeta times F collapse for the whole box. And this essentially matches with our analytical understanding also. You remove the recombination terms, then Q will be zeta times F collapse, because dQ dt is nothing but zeta times dF collapse dt. That is the equation you solved yesterday. You had the recombination term also, but that we are ignoring. This is the condition for photon conservation. Now you can ask the question that in the box, is this condition satisfied? And this was known even during the first phase of when these excursion set models were developed. But we started doing a more detailed calculation, more careful analysis of this. And what has been plotted here is this zeta F collapse divided by Q. Zeta F collapse divided by Q. And that should be unity if photon conservation is valid. And we found in conservation. Okay. So you can see, so these are different boxes of different resolution and different source properties. And depending on what you use, you can violate this conservation. Unfortunately, this photon conservation, this violation is not a very definite number. I mean, it's not something which you can easily correct for. Okay, so approximations will lead to an inaccuracies, we know, but if you can correct for it, then it becomes, it's not such a big problem. But unfortunately, we cannot do that here because it really depends on so many things in the box that it's difficult to do. In fact, this leads to something which is also related, which is known, which I call resolution dependent power spectrum. And this turns out to be a more severe problem. Let me not spend time on it because I want to finish on time. But if somebody is interested, I can discuss this in more detail. But what happens is we realized after a lot of calculations is that excursion set based models are generally photon non-conserving. Okay, and you can just prove this. It has to happen. I mean, it can be more, it can be less, but there is no guarantee of photon conservation in excursion set models. And this non-conservation leads to non-converging power spectrum at large scales. And this can have serious consequences when you try to interpret the data. Because you will be using these models and will compare with the data and will try to infer about like reionization sources or something. And it may bias your interpretation. So keeping this in mind, we felt that you need to develop a photon conserving model to solve these problems. And that is where the third code, which we have access to, is important. That's called script. So it's a semi-numerical code for reionization with photon conservation. So the idea here is very different from excursion set. It's a bit brute force, but so what you do is you take the sources and you generate ionized spheres around each source. What you can do is sometimes you may be able to club 2-3 sources or many sources which are very nearby and treat them as one source, but nevertheless you generate ionized spheres around that. And that is just, you just count the number of photons produced and distribute them. It did not be spheres. Okay, I put the spheres in quotation mark, but in actual case, it may depend on the density structure as well. But then there will be regions like these cells, which are like ionized by photons from two sources. In fact, they may actually have more photons than the number of hydrogen atoms. So if you just say it is ionized, these cells will be like over ionized. Okay, you have the ionization fraction has gone above 1 unphysical. What you do is, in the next round, you treat these cells, whatever the excess photons they have beyond what is required for complete ionization, those excess photons, you think of them as new sources, and you redistribute those photons to other regions. And then there is this part, I mean, there is no unique way of doing it. We have come up with something which seems to work. And yeah, this algorithm is by construction explicitly photon conserving. You won't violate photon conservation here. There is no guarantee of other things, but there won't be any photon non-conservation. Okay? This is like built into the code, and this is something which you will play with in today's tutorial. In fact, this leads to a power spectrum which is convergent. So what I have shown here, what I have plotted here is a quantity which is the power spectrum of the H1 field. I've just divided by the dark matter power spectrum. But the dark matter power spectrum is same in all the cases which we are interested in. So it's like dividing by something which is common to all. Now what happens is, if you look at scales, this is K versus this power spectrum, H1 power spectrum. Small k values are large scales, large k values are small scales. So these are scales which are much larger than the resolution at which you are working. Now the dotted lines are for the excursion set models, whatever previously I was discussing. But for what we did was we took the same source model, but just worked out the excursion set at two different grid resolutions. And you can see at large scales, which are much larger than the grid resolutions, there the power spectra are not converging. That is the dashed lines. However, the moment you come to photon conserving, that is the solid lines, that problem seems to go away. Okay, they seem to come and converge, fall on top of each other. So that is another problem which gets solved, as I was saying, this convergence problem. Remember, the photon conservation was put explicitly, but there was no guarantee to start with that this power spectrum would convert. Of course, we understood that this non-convergence arose from photon non-conservation. So we knew that once we develop the photon conserving model, it will converge, and it indeed did. So that is the basic idea which I wanted to give, that the patchy reionization is slightly more difficult to do. So you have to do it using simulations. You can do it using full numerical simulations or semi-numerical simulations. So it depends on what you want to do really. Full simulations will allow for more faithful modeling of the physics, but they are expensive computationally. Semi-numerical models, you can most of the time run on your laptop, but they require assumptions, approximations. Okay? Ideally, one should find a way to complement each other. You should be able to take the best of both and find a way to do that. And this is something which is open. I mean, we need to still come up with something which we can use efficiently. And in the next lecture, what we will do is we will take these discussions forward and discuss recent progresses in the field. What you should realize is we in India have a very good handle on this semi-numerical, reasonably fast approaches. So this is something, yeah, you should look at if you plan to work with people working in India. But if you want to develop a full scale simulation, that's also great. Okay, so I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Tej. So maybe we can have some questions now. If any of the participants, if you have questions, please raise your hand. You will be able to unmute yourself and ask questions. Prakash, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so Tirth, I was just wondering about these three codes. How do they compare on very small scales?
Ha, ha, ha. Okay, so we haven't compared them with each other very well yet.
Mhm.
Okay, using the same source models and so on.
Correct.
Yeah, so this is something which we plan to do uh, very soon, but we haven't done that yet.
Correct.
At small scales, yeah, I mean, I don't have a feel because these codes were basically developed keeping the 21 centimeter in mind.
Right.
And so hence like doing really for the large scale. So these work very well for low resolution. I mean, things become very fast and so on.
Correct.
So the only time we applied script at small scale, okay, I mean, not even small scales, even that was large scales, was for the Lyman alpha forest problem.
Yeah.
That I will discuss a bit in the next lecture. So yeah, I don't know what happens at really small scales, but
Correct.
one has to realize that these codes were not optimized for tracking the physics at small scales.
Correct. Correct. The other thing was whether these sources explicitly accounts for if there is a change in the clumping factor.
Okay, so I did not talk about the recombination part.
Mhm.
Yeah, in principle, you mean change in clumping factor as a function of redshift?
Right, exactly.
Yes,
That's good.
that is very easy to account for because most of these codes actually, when you are generating something at a given redshift,
Mhm.
you just do it at that redshift. You supply the parameters for that redshift. Okay, so you
Correct.
generate a map at 7.5 with some parameters.
Correct.
Then you go to 7.45.
Mhm.
You just take any other parameter which is based on your source model and your clumping factor model or your recombination model or your mean free path model or whatever,
Right.
and just run that code again without
Yes.
worrying about what happened at 7.5.
Right.
Okay, so yeah, in principle, redshift evolution is not a problem.
The other thing is, I mean, you're most of the time using dark matter only simulation. So clumping would be extremely large in dark matter, right? Because as compared to baryons, because baryons will have
Yeah. So the clumping, no, at these scales, I mean, where like K, let me just see if I can dig
one
out the
greater than
scales
one, I guess,
involved.
less than one.
Yeah. K less than 1.1.
Mhm.
These are scales much larger than the gene scales, and we
Gene
think
scale.
that at least at power spectrum level, the baryons are tracking the dark matter very well.
Mhm.
But of course, for recombination, when you put the clumping factor,
Yes.
that you have to put by hand. I mean, that you cannot just take from the dark matter simulation and put it.
Correct.
That will be wrong.
Mhm.
Okay,
Right.
that's something you have to model analytically or separately or using some hybrid box or whatever.
Correct.
Okay, so
Correct.
that we cannot just take from the dark matter simulation and put in. No, that we don't do.
Mhm.
We do it either analytically or through some other means.
Correct. Correct. Right.
Any other question from any participant? Yes, Harvari, you will be able to unmute yourself and ask.
Yeah, hi. Yeah,
Hi.
actually, I just had a question on this plot. This is all very new and interesting. So why is this not converging on the second, the two, the blue and the red should be?
Yes. Okay, there is not an easy answer for that. I have to really go into the details of excursion set. But the crude answer is, what happens is the way we do excursion set, this doing these spheres and tracking whether it is ionized or not. And at the end, we are also finding cells which don't cross the barrier and identify them as partially ionized. So at the end, this mixture of ionized and partially ionized cells lead to inconsistencies, which lead to photon non-conservation. However, Sharvari, what you will realize is that even in the dark matter case, what we realized while doing this problem, the excursion set the conditional mass functions are actually non-mass conserving. Okay. I mean, what happens is they don't show up because the amount of conservation is non-conservation is much smaller when you are doing halos and things like that. but it is always the excursion set models, even when applied to halos, don't conserve mass. Okay,
I
so
guess you don't explicitly put in the continuity equation or something.
no, you don't. That is the problem,
Right,
because
right.
yes, because you are doing it at a different level completely. Yes. Yeah, that is the problem. Those are the problems. So then Ravi Shet and people actually found out ways to do excursion set which are mass conserving, but then you lose all these nice analytical ways of doing it.
Right. Okay. Thanks. Yeah, it's a lot of new stuff. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So the other question I have was related to this excursion set method. I mean, when you consider the sources of reionization in excursion set model, you are considering them, they are whatever is the source distribution at the present snapshot or the present moment, right? But this would have formed at some later, I mean, earlier stages. So does that account for this in the excursion set?
No. Excursion set, that is one problem. When you are doing it at that snapshot, and whatever halos are there, you say that that's all I'm dealing with. This is fine if you are really thinking of star formation as burst like. Okay,
Right.
so whatever halos have formed, they did a burst star formation and that's it. Okay. So
Correct.
then they don't affect in the next time step anyway. Okay. So whatever you have are the halos, which are
Right.
like.
That's right.
But I agree, this is not a good approximation. So yeah, and that is not tracked. What is done is, some of these things you can account for by changing the value of zeta in some artificial way.
Correct.
So for example, when we compare with full simulations, full simulations do this, by the way, they can in principle track mergers and other things.
Correct.
What we do is we sometimes, it depends on the comparison, not all papers do that. What they do is they normalize everything to the same ionized fraction.
Right.
Okay, so you manipulate zeta to get the ionized fraction which you get in the simulation volume, the global ionized fraction.
Correct.
Okay, and then you compare the details of the map. Okay, whether the power spectrum matches or not.
But then zeta would have some systematic effect if we predict from the excursion set as compared to the full simulation.
Full simulation, yes. Yeah, in principle, yes. But that is, so there are so many other things to be solved before that.
Exactly.
People still don't worry about this.
Sure, yeah, correct.
Okay, so for the sake of sticking to the timeline, maybe we can take up the rest of the discussion over Slack, and then also today afternoon session there will be another talk by Tit. So during that time also. Thanks, Tit. So we can move to the second talk by Poonam. Second talk of the morning session and second talk by Poonam. So this is the second talk on introductory radio astronomy. So Poonam, I have made you co-host. You can share your screen.
Okay, let me just try that. I'll just a second. You can hear me well, right?
Yes.
All right. So I'm going to share the desktop. You do see something on the screen.
Yes, you see your slides. You can start the play.